Okay, so this is Bible study for Matthew chapter 9, verses 18 through 26. And our text for today says, while he was saying this, a synagogue leader came and knelt before him and said, "My daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her and she will live." Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples. Just then, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, "If I only touch his cloak, I will be healed." Jesus turned and saw her. "Take heart, daughter," he said. "Your faith has healed you." And the woman was healed at that moment. When Jesus entered the synagogue leader's house and saw the noisy crowd and people playing pipes, he said, "Go away, the girl is not dead but asleep." But they laughed at him. After the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took the girl by the hand, and she got up. News of this spread through all the region. So remember that you can download a PDF copy of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us. And the first question says, what did we talk about in our last study in the book of Matthew? So that was in chapter 9, verses 14 through 17. And we talked about John's disciples coming up to Jesus and saying, why do we fast and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples don't fast? And Jesus answers that question for them, talking about unshrunk cloth on an old garment and new wine in old wineskins. So we talked about the importance of remembering the purpose of the things that we do, so that when we do them, they're leading toward the ultimate goal instead of becoming the ultimate goal, which is like the mark of our holiness, that we do these things instead of that they are part of our spiritual practices that help us to become in right relationship with God and to grow in our relationship with God. So that's like the story of what goes wrong with religion. It becomes religion instead of relationship with God. And so there we go. Number 2, what happened next according to 9:18? While he was saying this, so this is like while he was talking to them, a synagogue leader came and knelt before him and said, "My daughter has just died." So, while he was saying this is quite a contrast from the previous question. So now, because this happened while he was saying it, but it's like a different story, I think we can look at these things in contrast. John's disciples and how they approached Jesus in saying, "Why do we fast and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples don't fast?" versus the synagogue leader who came and knelt down, and he was desperate. He wasn't trying to prove who was more godly. He just knew that there was power in Jesus. And so, B, a synagogue leader came and knelt before him and said, "My daughter has died." So he just needed help. And he believed that Jesus was somebody that could help him. And I just think about this in the way we approach religion, in the way we approach Christianity. Um, some people approach it like John's disciples. Now, wait, are we supposed to fast because we're fasting and they're fasting, but you're not fasting? And other people just fall at Jesus's feet and say, I don't know what we're supposed to do. All I know is I need help. And honestly, that's the way we come to Jesus, when we just fall at his feet and say, I don't know what the right things to do are. All I know is I need help. And there's a lot of people that never do come to Jesus. In fact, can't come to Jesus because they're too busy justifying their spiritual practices, and they're not willing to fall on their knees at the feet of Jesus and get the help that they need. See, the synagogue leader continued by saying, "But come and put your hand on her and she will live." So he had faith. He knew that even death is subject to Jesus. Number 3, how is this different from the question that Jesus got in the last text? I've already really talked about this. There's a big contrast here. Um, because this man, despite being a synagogue ruler, fell on his knees in front of Jesus. How did Jesus respond to the synagogue's leader's request? It says, so he went. Where is it? Let me make sure um, verse 19, Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples. So the response was, yeah, I'll be there. I'm on my way. Number 4, what happened when he was headed that way, according to 9:20 and 21? A woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. Yes. B, the woman said to herself, if I only touch his cloak, I will be healed. So this was a desperation. Like, I don't even need for him to pay attention to me. In fact, I hope he doesn't. I don't need for him to address me, but if I can just touch his cloak, I believe I'll be healed. Um, Number 5, how does this contrast with the people of the last text who were questioning Jesus? This is straight faith in Jesus versus these people that were questioning whether Jesus was really as spiritual as he claimed to be, or whether he was really as godly or as righteous as he wasn't even teaching his disciples to do the holy things that we do. Um, and yet these two people didn't approach Jesus at all like that. In fact, John's disciples, surprisingly, people who should have been a little bit more um, accepting of Jesus, seemed to be more like the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And yet this synagogue ruler approached with faith. And then so did the woman. Number 6, how did Jesus respond to her according to 9:22? See also Luke 8:40 through 56. And I'm going to pull up that because the story is a little bit different in Luke. A, he said, take heart, daughter, and your faith has healed you. Yes, that, in fact, that is there in Matthew, also in Luke eventually. B, according to Luke, he said, who touched me? And the disciples thought that was a crazy question. He's in a crowd of people and he said, who touched me? She knew what he meant. See, they thought he meant, everybody's touching. Who touched me? Jesus, we're all like crammed in here. It's a crowd. We're all touching each other. What do you mean, who touched me? How could we ever even figure out who brushed against you? No, somebody touched me intentionally. Luke tells us that Jesus knew that power had gone out from him. So this was something that when she was healed, it wasn't something, well, the cloak just did it like a magical cloak. That there was something that happened, and he felt sort of the spiritual connection of what had happened. Um, D, Luke tells us that the woman fell at his feet and explained in front of everything why she had touched him and that she had been instantly healed. So interestingly, probably she was trying to make sure nobody knew that she was even in the crowd because she wasn't supposed to be, because Jewish law prevented anybody from touching blood. And um, if you were bleeding, if a woman was in her time of the month, she was supposed to isolate. In fact, honestly, I've still had pastors, mostly not American pastors, but I had some African pastors that we were working with that struggled with the concept of if we have a woman preacher, what do we do when she's on her monthly menstrual cycle and it's time to preach? Because she can't preach from the holy place. She's unholy or unclean because of it, which is really Old Testament thinking. And we understand today that the reason that they had those laws had to do with diseases that are bloodborne. And we understand that probably in the last 50 years better than ever because of so many bloodborne diseases, sexually transmitted diseases, things like that we understand that diseases are contracted through bodily fluids and through blood. And so they didn't touch blood. and they didn't touch dead bodies. And if there was a skin disease, everybody isolated to make sure that they didn't get anything before they could. And that was how the whole Israelite people wasn't killed off in some sort of pandemic of epic proportions, because for generations, for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, they had practiced this before anybody understood disease. and and so she wasn't supposed to be in the middle of that crowd. She would have been isolated. But she knew that Jesus was her only answer. So she hid herself. She covered herself. She blended in with the crowd and tried to pretend like she wasn't there, and just reached out and touched his cloak. But he turned around and called her out, and she knew he was talking to her. So she fell at his feet, said, "This is what I did. This is why I did it. And when I did it, I was healed. I know I was." And then he said, "Your faith has healed you," according to Luke. And so he's basically explaining, this is why it happened. This is why you were healed, because you believed in it. You believed that God could heal you, and you, by the way, responded in faith. When we talk about faith today, excuse me, when we talk about faith today, we have a tendency to talk about it as this nebulous thing. But a couple stories ago, we talked about the faith, the men that lowered the man down to Jesus. This was faith. He said, "Get up, take your mat, and walk." It took faith for him to get up when he hasn't ever been able to get up. It took faith for his friends to bring him. It takes faith for people to come to Jesus and say, "I know you can do this." And Jesus recognizes faith, because he recognizes faith, not because he's Jesus and, "Ooh, I can see your faith," but because he sees what they did. Their faith impacted what they did. See, James tells us that you believe there's a God. Yeah, even the demons believe that. Faith without deeds is dead. Show me your faith by what you do. You say you have faith, but I have deeds. They don't come separate. When you have faith, you behave differently. You do crazy things. You step out and do, because I believe this is going to work. Um, so they trusted in Jesus to help them with their issues, and their walk bore that out. Number 7 says what happened in 9:23 through 26. And it says Jesus entered what amounted to a funeral. So finally, that episode was over, and he continues on to the home of this synagogue ruler, and people were playing pipes, not smoking pipes, playing pipes, so like a flute type thing, and or I don't know, some kind of musical instruments. The crowd had gathered and music was playing. So people were there mourning and playing music, and they were crowded in. And Jesus interrupted the funeral to say, "Go away, the girl is not dead." Now, I don't know about you, but I've been to a lot of funerals. That has never happened. Nobody's ever walked in and said, "Up, all right, guys, funeral's canceled. Person's alive." Then they set up. That didn't happen. It's never happened. But Jesus walked in and say, "Go home. The girl's not dead. She's just sleeping." And people laughed at him, because that is what you would do if somebody walked into a funeral and said something like that. After the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took the girl by the hand, and she got up. Then the laughing stopped. Um, News of this spread through all the region, although Luke tells us that Jesus told them not to tell anyone. I guess raising someone from the dead is hard to keep secret. Don't tell anybody. This is a whole funeral that Jesus just walked in and interrupted. Was she really sleeping? Or did he just tell him that to try to avoid attracting attention to what he was about to do? To just say, "Oh, don't worry, she's just sleeping." I know some of us are going to be like, "Oh, Jesus didn't lie." Um, Okay, then why does it say that he raised her from the dead in Scripture when he said she was only sleeping? And one of the two is true. Either she was really just sleeping and it's not a big miracle, or she was actually dead and he raised her from the dead, but he told everybody she was sleeping. Why did he tell them that? Well, so that they wouldn't say, "Hey, Jesus raised somebody from the dead." So they say, "Man, we're such fools. We thought she was dead, but she's sleeping." I mean, he was trying to get it not to be spread everywhere for a lot of reasons. Um, One of my favorite things to go back to is that Jesus had an understanding of his timing, and he said often, "It's not yet time for me to go do this. For you, any time is good." But he had something to accomplish before he went to the cross. We have these stories largely because he wasn't crucified in the first month of his ministry, that he was able to sort of do what he was supposed to do throughout the process, and then at the proper time he went to the cross. Um, we could also say that he touched a dead body. If she was really dead, he touched a dead body, and then he's not supposed to be in public. So he's just touched this woman, or she touched him, that was unclean with an issue of blood. She said it in front of everybody. Then he goes to a funeral and touches a dead body. What now? Number 8. Are you the type of Christian that worries about who is fasting and who isn't? Or the type of Christian that focuses on getting close to Jesus yourself and what he can do for you and the people around you if you just get close to him? And I would say that I would caution you about, some people only care about what Jesus can do for them, and don't really pay a lot of attention to what Jesus wants to do for the people around them, and that Jesus wants to do stuff not only for us or in us, but through us, to bless the people around us. Um, but I would say that even more so, these people just wanted to be close to Jesus. They knew that Jesus could help with their problems. And so they went to him and they fell on their knees. They reached out and touched him. They trusted in him. They believed that he could do something. Um, they didn't question how often he was fasting. They just said, "This guy, there's something here. We trust him." Um, we don't need to prove our spirituality. We can humble ourselves, fall at his feet. Why? Because we need his help. Um, People who are very spiritual don't need much of Jesus because they're very spiritual in their own right. They have great spiritual practices. And unfortunately, I think most of the church today doesn't need Jesus very much. Jesus could disappear from the church and nobody'd ever notice because they weren't really trusting in him to begin with. They had a lot of other things in mind that they were doing. And maybe Jesus has already disappeared from a lot of our churches. Maybe that's part of the problem because we have not been interested in serving him. It's not been the church devoted to worshiping Jesus, but rather the church devoted to worshiping ourselves and self improvement. So, anyway, loving this study of the book of Matthew, but let's take some time and examine ourselves.